Hi guys, it's Mo in the Deep End, here live on the internet. I am here with a breakdown of the first day of the Brandon Castigloine case. I said it right once. I now forevermore get to say the Let's Go Brandon case. Because according to my personal code of ethics, I have said it right correctly once and he gets a nickname now. Excuse me. Today, we're going to break down day one. So the state's first witness today was Sergeant Phillips, or Sergeant Yummy. I'm just saying, if there happens to be a chat field trip to New Hampshire, I would not be shocked. Hot girl, hot flash summer for everyone. This particular officer had 6 years of experience at the time of the crime, and July 1st of this year will make him 10 years experience as a cop. In his position currently, he's over the cops. He kind of attends to all the things that would be on a shift, making sure positions and sectors are covered, that kind of thing, making sure they're copping where there should be copping and not copping where they're not supposed to be copping. At the time of the crime, he was a field training officer, which basically meant that he was helping baby cops or maybe transfers from other jurisdictions to become aware of the standard operating procedure in this particular jurisdiction. He would respond to service calls. Basically, they were copping. They were doing, the normal copy things. I love trials, but I also don't like how pedantic they can be in breaking down explanations of normal things. But I also have to remind myself that some people aren't obsessive about trials and maybe don't know all of these things. So it is important to keep in mind, but I do find it tiresome with my ADHD sometimes, like, we already know this. Come on, move over. It's copying. It's not, so I'm working on it. At the time of the crime, he was neither the sort of lead investigator or a detective, someone that was going to secure the crime scene and delve deeper into things, be the kind of leader and assign people different things. He was simply helping the trainee cop kind of understand the ropes. On October 1st, the time of the crime, he was working second shift, and at 2:28, there was a call for a welfare check at Brandon's house. He and the trainee went to the house. A welfare check is simply when someone calls in concerned, maybe you have a friend that hasn't been answering phone calls, such as the case was here, and they just want officers to make sure that they don't need some sort of assistance or EMT things. Anything like that could be an issue. The house is owned by Mark's father. Now, this particular officer and his trainee were the second unit to get there. The first officer that had arrived was talking to the sister and grandma at the scene. And basically, what they knew at that time was that there were two men down in the residence. They were instructed to go up the stairs and to the furthest bedroom on the left, and that's where they would find the scene. Again, it's brought up that this is a single level split level home. So it's a single family split level home. Easy for me to say. The hallway, the last door on the left was the only one open. There was a large plastic drawer set that was in the middle of the hallway. On top of the plastic drawer thingy, there was a Glock handgun. This particular officer called out the presence of the handgun to the other officers. He did make note that it was a Glock, and he was able to kind of identify that because that is the particular weapon that he uses. He did go inside the bedroom, and he could kind of tell that it looked like the room was in preparation to be painted. All of the furniture was in the middle. It was covered in painter's tarps. There were painter tarps on the floor even. So some of his view to the room was obstructed. He was able to see Brandon very much in the doorway almost. He can't remember if he had to step over him or kind of maneuver his way around. Brandon was rocking back and forth kind of in the fetal position, and the other body was obscured by furniture. The sergeant identified Brandon as the same person that he saw in the fetal position that day. The officer stated that While Brandon wasn't making any forward motion, again, he was kind of trembling and mumbling, and he couldn't make out what he was saying. The other officer stated it was kind of, he did say it was kind of odd that this person was kind of in the room doing this kind of thing. The officer was asked if anyone was checking on the other person in the room, and he stated that the first arriving officer was the person that was going to check on Mr. Garcia. He went to check and realized that this person was pretty much dead at that point. So he was declared deceased by that other officer. He was identified later as Luis Garcia. This the officer that's currently on the stand stayed behind the defendant, and he observed a few feet from Brandon's head. There was a single shell casing on the floor, and the Glock in the hallway was almost, I would say, 3 to 4 feet from where Brandon was. It's not a very big house. The hallway looks incredibly narrow, and it looks like the plastic container kind of fills almost all of the available space in the hallway. The officer does step down on this at this point because the way things kind of go, they're handed glossy pictures in the witness stand, but if they need to go kind of identify something in a bigger format, the screen for that is out of the way and towards the side. Now, I believe the entire state of New Hampshire is out of WD-40 because this is the loudest, squeakiest chair. And with my ADHD, I was like, oh my gosh, just get them, just give them some ADHD, or give them some ADHD, give me some WD-40 and I will put this chair to rights. A close-up of the room is shown. They go back to where the single shell casing was on the floor, and that's a shell that's left behind after a bullet is fired. Uh, Again, they just kind of show more pictures of what the room looked like. And then Brandon was placed in cuffs to secure the scene, and this officer was in charge of scene security after that. At this time, Brandon still looks very scared. He's taking many notes. He's trying to get his lawyers to look at things, look at the notes. He seems very polite, says please and thank you to his attorney. Uh, and then they have the cross from the defense. The defense was asked about the welfare call that this officer got and found out he was working Sector 3 during the swing shift. The officer stated it took about 10 minutes to get to the house after the call, even though he was relatively close. Um, my father is from New Hampshire, and when we would go visit, it is very mountainous, it is very rural, and even if you're fairly close, as the crow flies, it's still going to take you a little bit to get anywhere, just with the vagaries that are New Hampshire. Now, this officer, they kind of switched back and forth, and I believe that the trainee officer was the one that was taking care of the log to kind of keep the scene secure. This trainee officer had only been on the force for about 2 weeks. Now, again, I don't know if that means that he was a transfer or a true baby cop, but this is just what was brought out on cross. He and the trainee officer arrived moments after the first officer. The defense was asked if the officer was what he was wearing at that day, and he said he was wearing the full standard police uniform, but his boots that he was wearing were self-purchased. Now, I believe that she asked this for a reason. I'm pretty sure either A, they have someone that can check out foot impressions, or they're going to show that the foot impressions were not taken and they trampled all over everything, uh, getting in and out of the hallway and things like that, so they've contaminated the scenes. She inquired about whether the officer wore gloves, but the officer doesn't remember if he and his trainee were wearing gloves, but he states that the first arriving officer was wearing gloves. So the info that this officer had from dispatch was 2 men down, one with blood around him, and those were the facts that he had going in. The goal was to go in and render aid. Officer Marin went in first, then this officer, then the trainee. So they were kind of a cop sandwich, if you will. Now, the officers at this point did not sweep into any other rooms because they were told that the scene was in the far left room. The officer stated they didn't look for, again, look for other people. The defense kind of walks the officer through how he remembered the scene and how he reported it. This officer couldn't remember whether a drop cloth was on the furniture, on the floor, or kind of the greater details. And the officer couldn't remember if Officer Moran, the first responding officer, had to move drop cloths in order to see the victim or, otherwise disturb the scene. Officer Moran did have to move around furniture to get a good look, so he kind of had to squirrel his way around. The defense asked if there was anything that the officer noticed that was off with the placement of the gun on the plastic storage thingy. This situation happened very quickly, the officer states, and it was quickly, but he states it wasn't rushed in the way that Brandon was taken out of the room in cuffs to await the detectives arriving. Now, the dispatch recorded that the officers arrived at 2:38 p.m. and Brandon was taken into custody at 2:40, according to dispatch record. Now, the officer isn't sure when he was able to find the shell casing, so he doesn't remember if it was before they took Brandon out or after Brandon was already gone. He's a little unclear on that. The officer and the trainee were placed on scene security. The trainee picked up the pistol on the drawer. When it was called out, took out the magazine and then put it back on the dresser. So the officer does, admit that the gun could have been put back on the organizer in a completely different orientation due to these actions. This officer's trainee kept the log of who was going into the room, the other people in the house, and it doesn't make very clear on the entrance log whether the people were going into the house proper or just into the room. It's a bit unclear, and the trainee's not on the stand, so they can't really interrogate this particular officer uh, with that kind of information. But it is, reviewed that there were at least 6 to 7 different detectives and other people that went in and out of the house that day. Now, the reason you do scene security is to preserve evidence and make sure that the crime scene isn't contaminated. This officer is certain that his trainee did do a good log. The defense brings up that the officer was on the scene at Mark's house, so Brandon's house, until after his shift. This officer states that he went back to the department when Brandon was being served with a body warrant. A body warrant, gets your clothing, gunshot residue, buccal swabs. They can get, under your fingernails if they believe that that would get any evidence, and it's on the warrant. Now, he believes that the state police did that, and he did not witness any of that particular thing or activity. He was in kind of the bullpen area. So the photos the state showed the witness were questioned. This officer didn't take the photos and he's not sure when they were taken. The defense asks about a glass shelf. I guess it was either moved or in a different placement at some point. Maybe when the defense makes their case, it will make more sense as to why they asked. Who was the officer in charge of that scene, and he wasn't sure if it was major crimes or who did that. During redirect, another officer was basically, the state said, another officer assigned the trainee to get the log, and this officer doesn't remember exactly where they were when they were at taking this log. So he believes they were stationed outside the front door, but he cannot quite recall. And then the state wasted 2 minutes of our lives by having us sit there like jackasses for 2 minutes. So, again, this is where any smart and sane and normal person is going to say, well, 2 minutes of silence in a courtroom is kind of different than 2 minutes at an active crime scene. Recross. Uh, duh. Basically, 2 minutes at a crime scene is very different than 2 minutes in court. And he talks about being outside the door and that he was not with his particular trainee the entire time. He was being kind of pulled in opposite directions. So it was up to the trainee to make a, complete and accurate list of who was going in and out of the house. Now grandma takes a stand. And let me tell you, this woman reminds me of my grandma, and she was from New Hampshire. So it was like, I'm from New Hampshire, Bosquen. We're in the car. I have an idea. So She is now and forever Granny on the stand. I understand that her name is Frances, but she is Granny to me, because she just reminds me of my grandmother, and she was awesome. So Granny states that she is hard of hearing in one ear, and she was able to sit down while swearing in because she's Granny, and we will do stuff for our grannies that we won't let other people do. She has been married for 35 years to Jeff, has seven kids, many grandkids, and she doesn't know how many great greats. She worked at AT&T for many years and then Macy's. She explained she lives in another town and that it would take her about 15 minutes to get to Brandon's house, and that Brandon's sister lives in Massachusetts. The state asks about Louis, the victim, and so today when I was watching day two, they call him Louis, but then during this particular part, they call him Luis. So y'all need to stop confusing me. I'm just one Mo. I'm not even good with names. So don't change them if I even halfway remember them. Granny met the victim at church and she would call him Garcia. They became good friends to the point that Garcia and his wife moved into Granny and Jeff's house for about a year and a half when they were moving from Massachusetts. Granny had been going to the New England Pentecostal church for about 10 years, and beyond church activities, Garcia's would do odds and ends for the church. They would have a lot of functions at church, theme days, picnics, that kind of thing, a lot of fellowship. Granny said they went to fellowship on Sunday and Monday, and then Wednesday and Tuesday were Bible studies. Now, Thursdays were like small groups, and that's when you take, just a couple people and you guys decide, if there's a book or something that you're going to study within the Bible, and you get together at houses and kind of do that as you will. So Thursdays were for home kind of Bible studies. So that could be at the Garcia's house, that could be at Granny's house, that could be at a lot of different houses and different parishioners. Brandon and Granny would also go to the nursing home to minister to the elderly, and that usually happened on Mondays. So looking at the schedule, I mean, these people were at church like all the time. Okay. So that's a lot of churching just for me. Granny learned that Mark needed some extra painting done, so Garcia offered to take on that job. Um, Mark had lived in that house for very many years. That is Brandon's father, so she's very familiar with the layout of the house. And the last time that Granny saw Brian was that Monday after taking him to the nursing home. Granny got a call from Danielle, and she and her husband got to the house and rang the doorbell several times. But she realized that the doors were locked, and her husband had recently suffered a fall, so she decided to take, hubby back home so he could be more comfortable. And then she told Danielle that she would drive back. Now, when she wasn't able to open the door and on the way home, she called Patty, Garcia's wife, and she called Danielle because, she couldn't get the door open. And Patty did warn that, when Garcia is working, he tends to turn off his phone. Granny called the sister back after, she wasn't able to get to the door, dropping off Grandpa, you know. So she dropped off Grandpa, came right back, and she actually pulled in a little bit behind Danielle. It was Garcia's car, then then Danielle's car, then Granny's car. Now, Danielle had her three kidlets in the car. I believe she said a newborn, a 2-year-old, and a 3-year-old. Girl, been there. Been there so hard. So Granny stayed with the babies at that time, and Danielle tried to get in. She called her father to see if there was a hideaway key or something like that. Danielle threw acorns at the window that was lit, trying to get attention. She tried the front door and the back door. Um, Granny has a 3-a-day pack cough, though. Granny sounded like she was choking on something, so she kept trying to take some water and do that. Finally, she asked for a cough drop, and I think everyone was about to offer one to her at that point. Um, the front, basically, Granny was shown a bunch of pictures of Brandon's house. Uh, she does kind of make a little bit of a joke because when she went to the front door, she is on the shorter side, so she wasn't able to use the knocker. And that was pretty cute and funny. We love our grannies. Um, and she wasn't able to remember if when you push the doorbell on the outside, you can hear it on the inside because sometimes doorbells are fairly loud, so you can tell if you've um, pushed it. Uh, Danielle was able to get in contact with the father and found the key that was hidden. Uh, she was fairly normal when she went into the house, and when she came back out, she was crying, shaking, and upset. Danielle called 911 after she got out, but Granny isn't really sure on the specifics of when 911 was called. Granny said that Danielle was so shaken she wanted to see what was going on, so she went into the house. Granny went up the stairs, and on the last room on the left, the state showed the steps again, and she was yelling for Brandon and Garcia. Granny is now visibly upset, and she could be upset because she's trying not to choke to death, but I think it's more the scene. But I'm going to throw that out there because she was having a rough day with that cough. The state was shown again, shows photos of Granny, and she can photos of the house. I understand the need for it, but it does get a little bit like, okay, we know it's a split level. We know it's a single family house. Can we move on? Granny does state that when she finally did get to the room, she found B in the fetal position, rocking back and forth, and she was trying to get him to answer. She touched him, but he wouldn't respond. He was only, to her, mumbling back and forth and in that position. Granny said that where Garcia was, she saw a leg and she saw Garcia with all the blood. She is visibly upset right now, going through this on the stand. She says that, once she saw that, left the house crying. She called her husband, kind of shouting, "He's gone, he's gone." Grandma stayed with Danielle and the kids until the police arrived, and Granny states that she really didn't see anyone else in the house, but she did see Brandon taken out of the house by the officers, and Grandma is really having a rough time. And she's forced to point to Brandon to identify him as the person she saw in the house at this time through tears. The defense gets Grandma now, and Granny asks, the defense asks if Granny is okay to move forward. Now, Granny did speak to the police 4 years ago, so she was given her report to kind of refresh her memory for a couple things. According to the police report, she did state that Brandon was praying when she walked in the fetal position. Now, Granny has seen him pray in the fetal position in church, so it wasn't unusual in Granny's estimation. And she also stated to the police that, Brandon was speaking in tongues, but she doesn't remember really what was said, if anything. The defense is doing a very good job with this witness of impeaching her testimony by, saying, hey, this is what you reported. You were being truthful when the cops asked you this 4 years ago. Do you think it's, possible that your memory was better at the time than now? So he did a very gentle job of saying, hey, maybe this is, something that you are saying differently now without looking like a jerk. And that seems to be a very hard thing for a lot of attorneys. Now, she did state that, after reading the report, yes, he was mumbling and speaking in tongues. Granny stated when Brandon is deep in prayer, he kind of blocks out the entire world. And it's really hard to rouse him from that state. In church, it's not an odd thing for Brandon to go into one of these kind of meditative, self-contained states. Um, she did state that she touched him that day, but again, the defense wants to refresh her to um, you know, give her a chance to read the report, and it seems like she did not touch him that day, from what the report said that she made to the police. Granny, kind of again went back to, Brandon does a lot of praying in church. It's really normal for him to be in that position. The police that day asked if she tried to talk to Brandon, and she said no, though she did state today that she tried to ask him if he was okay. So this might be one of the things where you look back and you're like, oh, I wonder if they're okay. And you just think, well, I would have asked them. Of course I would have asked if, I saw my grandson on the floor and well, a dead guy, for lack of better words. I'd have said it was okay. But at the time, she said that she didn't say anything to him. Now, Granny says that she has seen him pray. Again, this is, you know, the defense is really reiterating that it is not unusual for Brandon to pray in this particular position and to be kind of unable to be roused and things like that. And then the granny asked about the cell phone that Brandon had, and she said she knew Brandon to carry his cell phone with him at all time. Now, then we go to day two because Granny didn't get done quite as much as we thought she was going to get done. So Granny's testimony resumes on day two. Brandon is in another button-down shirt today. Uh, Granny's back on the stand. Brandon continues to look very nervous, very anxious, and it does make me wonder, kind of based on behavior and the testimony thus far, and I say this as I am not a doctor or a lawyer or even a personal spiritual guide, but he his behavior, his sort of self-soothing and getting into a tight kind of soothing rhythm and ball, um, it's a lot of the same behavior I saw when I worked with adults on the spectrum. Now, they were more profoundly on the autism spectrum, but it does kind of look like that to me. Like I said, I ain't got none of that fancy school learning, but that's just what it kind of looks like to me. And I'm wondering if that will come out on defense. Uh, Grandma appeared to be praying and pretty upset when the jury came in. This defense attorney, the guy that looks like the jump to conclusion Matt's guy, really hates the lectern and staying where the mic can catch him. The defense talked about when the sister got there, and Grandma testified for the state that she stayed by the car with the great grandkids and that Danielle was the one going around the house. So basically, the defense wanted to kind of make a point that Grandma didn't see Danielle, the sister, try to open the back door. So that was kind of why they were asking. Now, the defense also asked, if Brandon knew Garcia and would Brandon go to all the church services and the prayer nights that were at other parishioners' home. So on Tuesday and Thursday, it looks like they were either in Grandma's house, Garcia's house, or even Mark's house to do kind of the small groups. Garcia was an elder and a minister at the church, and from all the things that Granny could kind of see and observe, Brandon and Garcia were close to each other. Now, Bible study meetings can sometimes lead to heated discussions about, interpretation, what the Bible actually means, but Granny described it as friendly and it usually ended up being resolved. Now, church was still on Monday and Wednesday, so Brandon's schedule basically looked like going with Granny to the nursing home, going to a small, parishioner prayers meeting, and then Wednesday he would go to church. Thursday was another small group, and I guess they rested on Friday. I don't, maybe they had a hoedown on Friday. I don't know. We haven't got to Fridays yet. Um, and Granny stated on the stand that she saw, Brian and Garcia argue, but only in the context that they had, those heated Bible talks. It wasn't like a personal beef of anything. And Grandma seems to have brought cough drops today, so praise the Lord. Brandy does take kind of a long moment to stare at Brandon at this point. And redirect. Yesterday, the defense asked if Granny had seen Brandon pray in the fetal position before, and she stated yes, but she mainly saw this at church. Now, it was something that he would do sometimes in, outside of the church settings, like he would do it on prayer nights, or if they were having like a small group at the church, I mean, he would just go up to the altar and I guess have Brandon prayer time. Now, the state at this point kind of does like some shitty acting and kind of some, I'm going to go ahead and say snark, but he's counting like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and he's basically saying, so, you know, has Brandon ever stayed in this prayer state for 5 hours? And that is where I'm going to stop this video because it's about 30 minutes, and that is the end of Granny's testimony. You know, I think it's easy for us to lose sight of sometimes the defendant's family. Crimes don't happen in a vacuum. It's sometimes easy to forget that the defendant's family can be just as shattered by these events as the victim's family. And you can definitely tell that in a small town, in a small church community, this has really just damaged things beyond repair for some of these people. And it's heart-wrenching to watch, you know, these particular witnesses. And the victim's wife, I'll be covering in the next video. It it's really an eye opener to be very mindful that these crimes, these actions, these court trials that we really love, um, they leave a wake of devastation. So while we enjoy them, it is good to be mindful of that. I'm trying to be just a little bit less of a dick. So I'm adding a, you know, Bob Rossian ending to this one today. Just trying to get back to Happy Mo since I had that other video today. Have a great day. Be just a little bit less of a dick. Make the world a little bit less dickish. And I hope to see you soon. Bye.